Perfect Day for Bananafish is a short story by J.D. Salinger. As you may already be aware, this story about Seymour and Muriel Glass is part of a greater collection of stories about the Glass family that involves Seymour's brothers and sisters, and Seymour is the eldest child. This particular story is about Seymour's honeymoon experiences with his wife Muriel after he has returned from World War II. Yes, it would be nice to have all of the background knowledge of the Glass family prior to reading this short story, but I teach it as a standalone story, and I provide whatever other details of their family may be necessary, and I will highlight some of those details in this video review. The story begins with a detailed description of what the girl in 507 is doing, which includes waiting for her call to be put through, which immediately tells us that the story is not contemporary, and actions that depict that she is intent on beautifying herself. The Saks blouse also indicates that she has money. Immediately, we have some questions. How old is this girl? Why is she staying in a hotel? Is she by herself? Is she that vain? Etc. And students typically point out that the ashtray is congested, which suggests that she's smoking a lot. So is she nervous for the phone call? And if she's smoking, she must be of age to smoke. So is she really a girl? And if she's allowed to smoke in a hotel room, again, it's clearly not a contemporary story. Since we eventually find out that this is our intro to Muriel, Seymour's wife, and this is their honeymoon, the twin bed seems to be odd and indicate a level of physical separation between them. When the phone call begins, we come to understand that it's Muriel's mom, clearly worried about Muriel being on vacation with Seymour. The fact that Muriel keeps referring to her mom as mother indicates Muriel's annoyance with her mother's overbearing personality. Ironically, her mother treats her like a little girl, as she is referred to in paragraph 1. Her mother mentions some vague details about Seymour's odd behavior and the fact that he was released from the army hospital too soon. These seem to be the first indications that Seymour is mentally unwell, and my students typically argue that he's likely suffering from PTSD. Though this term is never used, Muriel quickly downplays Seymour's behavior, stating that she's not afraid of him. And she also refuses to accept her mother's invitation to come home, and then she can vacation without him. At this point, the reader can assume that Muriel is either so selfish that she'd rather vacation than deal with Seymour's issues, or it's possible that Muriel genuinely doesn't know how serious Seymour's issues are. The latter is very possible, since PTSD was not added to the DSM until 1980. In their conversation, Muriel's mother, though seemingly concerned for Seymour, is more concerned for Muriel's safety. We do eventually find out in some of the background information that Muriel's mother is not happy with Seymour for a variety of reasons, but namely because they eloped rather than having a traditional wedding. Their conversation also turns into what the guests at the hotel are wearing, the fact that Muriel is sunburned, Seymour's apparent tattoo, and that Seymour spends all of his vacation time on the beach in a bathrobe. Now, Seymour doesn't have a tattoo, but this leads my students to believing two possibilities. Number 1, Seymour's tattoo is actually a wound that he received in war. Or 2, his tattoo is a form of branding, especially if he was a prisoner of war. Either way, it's evident that Seymour is self-conscious and doesn't want people staring at him and judging him. Then the reader is stuck in the middle of a brief conversation between a different mother and daughter, a little girl named Sybil, and her mother, staying at the same hotel as Seymour and Muriel. Sybil is likely around 4 years old and is asking her mother where Seymour is. This is confusing to the reader because immediately the reader believes that Seymour must know her, or even perhaps that they're related. However, it's very apparent that Sybil's mother has no idea what Sybil is asking, and is actually annoyed at her daughter's question. The communication between them is poor. Sybil's mom then leaves her daughter to run along the beach by herself while she goes and gets a drink with a friend. Odd. And then we have this beautiful reunion between Seymour, who is on a part of the beach that's not even owned by the hotel, likely in his desire to be left alone, and Sybil. two alienated individuals from the people who should love them the most. Through their conversation, we come to find out that these two have simply met by happenstance. They both give each other the attention that they both require by listening to one another, something that they are craving desperately from their respective loved ones. Seymour tells Sybil that he doesn't want to talk about his wife, and ironically, the things that Seymour says that Muriel is likely doing, like beautifying herself, is exactly what she's doing. Color is symbolic here. Seymour jokes around claiming that Sybil is wearing a blue bathing suit, when we've been told that it's yellow. Seymour himself is wearing a blue bathing suit. The colors blue and yellow carry an abundance of symbolism. So this scene can be interpreted in a few different ways. Blue can indicate innocence. It is also symbolic for depression. Yellow is symbolic of joy. So perhaps you can draw your own conclusions here. It is obvious that Sybil is jealous, yellow also represents jealousy, of another little girl who spends time with Seymour, whose name is Sharon Lipschutz. It's clear that Seymour enjoys the innocence of children over the judgmental behaviors of many adults. When Seymour wants to go with Sybil and look for Bananafish, the diction is positive. He carefully lays down his towel and meticulously folds his bathrobe and lays it on top. Suddenly, his protective bathrobe is taken off in the presence of Sybil, with whom he feels comfortable. He holds her hand, he picks up a float, and they go into the water. Make note of this scene, as we will revisit it later. In the water, we come to the real crux of the story. Seymour unburdens himself by sharing his experiences in war in a way that won't frighten Sybil. In fact, she takes Seymour literally when he explains who Bananafish are and what they do. It becomes clear that Bananafish are soldiers who go off to war. They begin as normal people and soon turn into savages due to the nature of war. They are forced to kill and bear witness to the horrific nature of war. And when they return home, they have a challenging time reintegrating back into society. And according to Seymour, whilst foreshadowing the end of the story, the Bananafish get banana fever, PTSD, and they die. Seymour is explaining his own struggles and is happy to do this with someone who is willing to listen. When Sybil innocently claims that she sees one in the water, he kisses her feet to show how overcome he is with emotion. Seymour knows that Sybil doesn't really know what he's saying, but her imagination means more to him. When Sybil's mother calls them back into the shore, they say their final goodbye and she runs off. And now the diction changes. I mentioned that I wanted to come back to that previous scene just before Seymour and Sybil went into the water. The diction was so positive. But now that Sybil is gone, and Seymour is aware that he'll never see her again, look at how the diction turns negative. Number 1, Seymour immediately puts his robe back on. Number 2, he closes the lapels tight. 3, he jams the towel into his pocket. And 4, the float is now slimy, wet, and cumbersome. At the elevator, he has one of his outbursts alluded to earlier by Muriel's mother, and he yells at a random woman for apparently staring at his feet. Seymour enters the hotel room, which oddly smells of nail polish remover, even though it was Muriel who was doing her nails at the beginning of the story. He pulls out a gun, and Seymour tragically kills himself. When Seymour weirdly tells Sybil that he's been waiting for her father to arrive hourly earlier on in the story, it is because Seymour clearly knew what he was going to do and didn't want to leave her alone. There are a few considerations to make note of. Number 1, the topic of alienation. And if you know the background of Seymour and Muriel, you'll know that they are not alike in any way. Seymour is a spiritual savant and highly intellectual, while Muriel is materialistic and shallow. She spends her time beautifying herself while Seymour internally struggles on the beach. Number 2, the lack of communication. In the story, there is poor communication with every encounter with the exception of Seymour and Sybil. Number 3, mental illness and suicide. This is a tragic story that sheds light on a serious topic. There is a need for everyone to be able to have someone to talk to and share things with. Unfortunately, Seymour felt like there were no other options for him. And 4, innocence. The scene in the water between Seymour and Sybil is beautiful. They listen to each other, and Seymour loves Sybil's willingness to imagine the bananafish, despite the fact that they aren't real.